From the Soapbox is the official podcast for the American Animal Hospital Association's digital newsroom, Trends. Here, we take inspiration from the familiar soap notes, but instead of looking at the condition of a patient, we're diagnosing and discussing the state of the veterinary industry. We'll chat about the challenges, trends, and innovations shaping the veterinary world with voices from across the community. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Singler. Thanks for listening. Welcome to a very special episode of From the Soapbox. I'm honored to announce that my guest today is the one and only Dr. Temple Grandin. If you're not familiar with her story, Dr. Grandin is a world-renowned expert in animal behavior and a distinguished professor of animal science at Colorado State University. She has written multiple books on animal behavior that showcase her unique understanding of animals' needs and why they behave the way they do. She is just as well known for her pioneering advocacy work as an individual with autism. Growing up in a time when parents were encouraged to institutionalize their autistic children, there were often no expectations that they would be able to go to school or be successful in the workplace. With the support of her family and teachers, she defied those odds, using her skills as a visual thinker to design revolutionary systems to reduce animal stress on farms and in animal processing facilities. She is a sought-after author and speaker on autism and neurodiversity, helping both individuals with autism and those who support them learn ways to thrive and discover how their neurodiversity can be a superpower. Most recently, she was named one of USA Today's 2025 Women of the Year. On the podcast, we got to chat about where her love for animals started, fear-free handling, and how her autism helped her develop a special understanding of animals that fueled her whole career. Without further ado, getting her time to talk from the Soapbox, Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Temple Grandin, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm very happy to have you on the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here today.
My first question is just that I would love to hear from you how your love and your interest in animals began.
It was all in my teenage years. And horses, my life revolved around horses. And I ended up going for school, kids with problems. They put me to work running a horse barn, cleaning 9 stalls every day. And I worked with my roommate, getting horses ready for show. My life revolved around horses. That started right around age 14, so it's teenage years. They also had a small dairy there. And I learned how to milk cows. And then about a year later, I went out to my aunt's ranch. And that's where I got introduced to the West. And this just brings up the really important thing, is that students get interested in stuff they get exposed to. If I hadn't been exposed to those things, there's no way I would have gotten interested in them. It's that simple.
And did you ride horses as well?
Oh, yes, I sure did. I was in a 4-H horse program. I'd spend hours getting ready for the English equitation class and the trail class. We practiced the mailbox and the water canvas.
I love that. As a fellow equestrian, that always makes me smile, brings back such happy memories.
You know, one of the ribbons I was most proud of was, it wasn't a first place, it was like a 4th place out of maybe 20 horses. So I beat out a whole bunch of other horses, and that was one of my most proud ribbons, because I was ahead of so many other horses on doing the trail class.
I love that. And then from there, I would love to hear more about, and some of our audience may not know, but you are widely recognized as an expert in animal behavior, which I just discovered the word ethology and ethologist.
That's right, ethology.
Which is the study of animal behavior,
Animal
correct?
behavior in the natural environment. And I was very lucky when I was in college to have a very good classical animal ethology class from a retired Harvard professor. And this is studying animals out in the natural world. Of course, back in the 60s, there was a lot of people just thought, B.F. Skinner was everything, stimulus response was everything. But after taking Dr. Evans's class, it was obvious to me that stimulus response did not explain everything.
Of course, yeah, animals are much more complex than that.
That's right. And was very, very lucky to have that class.
It's amazing what having kind of a formative experience like that can do, whether it's an experience riding horses or a wonderful teacher or mentor who sort of guides you and helps you spark that curiosity for something that you really go on to focus on?
Well, that class was very influential, and I was very lucky that in my small college, I went to Franklin Pierce College in New Hampshire, and it had just started up. It had just over 400 students, and I was very lucky that we had that class.
That's amazing. And so, how did your interest in animals, your exposure to animals, and then this wonderful professor that you had, this wonderful class that you took, how did that then translate into you continuing to study animal behavior?
I got interested in it. I was also very interested in optical illusions. Like if you watch the HBO movie, I made the optical illusion room, the Ames distorted room, where one person looks bigger than the other. So I thought maybe I'd become an experimental psychologist and study visual perception because that also interested me. Again, that was something I was exposed to high school in a science movie. You see, you can't get interested in stuff that you're not exposed to.
And so what was it that made you really go down the path of animal behavior when you had these two interests?
Well, I originally majored in psychology. I was terrible in math, never have passed an algebra class. And I'm seeing a lot of really brilliant people being held back by that. In fact, I had a chance to talk to a veteran who'd failed algebra in college, couldn't do it, but she aced the mechanical aptitude test in the Army. So the Army put her to work fixing airplanes. And our educational system doesn't seem to recognize mechanical aptitude, but it's where you can visualize just how things work. And then I ended up designing a lot of facilities, all around the country. I when I first started out in Arizona, I went up to the editor of our state farm magazine and got his card, started writing for that magazine. I was the livestock editor for 7 years. That was really helpful in getting my career started because I went out to all these farms, all these places, and I did stories on them.
I love hearing that all these formative experiences sort of combined together and then you created this career. I think that's something we talk a lot about in among veterinary professionals now. We see all these other avenues to use our veterinary degree and our love of animals and our training beyond just being in the clinic, which is of course still a very important thing that a lot of us need to do, but there are so many other ways we can use.
That's still a really important part.
Of course, yes, very essential part that many of us will continue to do. And I wanted to talk more. You mentioned sort of being a visual thinker,
Yep.
and you've spoken a lot about your neurodiversity and your talent as a visual thinker, and how you feel it has helped you to see things that perhaps others don't in terms of animals, their fears, their habits, their needs, their behavior, and how the way that your mind works, the way that you see things, has made you especially attuned to some of those things. I'm wondering, do you feel that the reverse is true in the sense that animals possess unique abilities to connect with and understand the needs of neurodivergent people?
Well, I think I'm an object visualizer. Everything I think about is a picture. Now, not all autistic people are object visualizers. In fact, I discuss the different kinds of thinking in my book, Visual Thinking. You have an object visualizer like me. This is going to be good at things like mechanical aptitude, horrible at algebra, understand animals, because animals live in a sensory based world. Their memories are going to be sounds, pictures, smells. They don't think in words. And the object visualizer is sort of like having little phone pictures for a memory. And the mathematical thinker thinks more in patterns. There are different kinds of thinking. And then, of course, you've got word thinking. And a lot of people are mixtures. But in the very first research that I did with cattle, I got down in the chutes to see what cattle were seeing going through the chute. And people thought that was kind of crazy, but I didn't know at the time that other people thought in words. And I can see if you think in words, they say, well, why would I be looking at what cattle are seeing? But when you think in pictures, it's obvious to me to look at what cattle were seeing. And I noticed they would stop at a shadow, they'd stop at a reflection, there'd be a coat on a fence, there'd be a truck parked along the fence. These things would make the animals stop. I call them the distractions. and you take these things out of the facility, they often will go through the facility much more easily.
And do you think that the fact that animals sort of, potentially think in pictures and images and that kind of thing in a similar way to some humans with neurodiversity, that there's animals are maybe better able to understand what that human's experience might be?
Well, if you're thinking pictures, also sounds. Animals are very sensitive to tone of voice. If you went and said, "Good dog," to a dog like that, I don't think it'd react very well because that's not a very nice tone of voice. Very sensitive to tone of voice and vocalizations. And then also smell. There was research done at Cornell University with an MRI machine of the dog, and they found that there's a gigantic internet trunk line of fibers going from the olfactory bulb back to the visual cortex. Smell pictures? Isn't that trippy? Maybe the dog has smell pictures. That's kind of a sensory realm totally different than we would have.
Yeah, I mean, that would explain a lot, though. I mean, the things that animals can pick up on that a lot of humans just really don't seem to have any awareness of because of our range of smell, our range of hearing, all of these things.
Well, words kind of cover up things. In fact, I reviewed some research in visual thinking where children tend to be a lot more visual thinkers. Like, I'll show a picture of an animal stopping at a sunbeam. I show that to elementary school kids, all the hands go up. I show that to school administrators, I'll tell you, no hands go up.
Yeah.
They don't say
That's
it.
so interesting. We kind of learn words and perhaps lose some of the visual thinking
That's right.
as we replace it with vocabulary and
Well, words tend to cover up visual thinking, or rather sensory-based thinking. Because I had an interesting conversation with a lady at Stanford University, of all places. She's in facilities maintenance, and she would go into the basements of the buildings in Stanford University, this big citadel of engineering, and she could listen to the equipment and goes, "That pump's gonna fail. I'm gonna order one right now. It has a 2-month delivery time. It's running rough. I know the bearings are going bad on it." You see, that's sound visualization. I can totally relate to that. And she said the engineers don't get it. But she can go, "That pump's gonna fail. I'm ordering one right now before it fails."
and then, of course, there are dogs who work as service dogs who can tell when their owner's blood sugar is low or when they're about to have a seizure, or in some studies, be able to detect cancer in tissue samples and all of these amazing things.
Well, that's very, very sensitive smell is how they're doing that.
Yes. Yes.
The dog there's an interesting Oliver Sacks article, book chapter, about a guy that, he took some drug, and it gave him a sense of smell like a dog. And he talks about walking down the street, smelling all these smells he never even thought about before. He said, "Well, that must be sort of like what it's like to be a dog." It's a very interesting chapter.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah. I mean, I sure my experience was nothing near that, but you know, the closest I can come to that is during pregnancy. I remember I had a very heightened sense of smell. Everything was harder to sort of tolerate in terms of smell. But that was a very temporary condition. But it's amazing how the body changes and what differences there are between species. But I was almost kind of wondering about whether you've studied the use of emotional support animals or service dogs in your work with studying neurodiversity, in particular autism.
Well, it's very important that when you train service dog puppies to take them everywhere, so nothing scares them. Because there's a lot of dogs today, they're just afraid of everything. They haven't had enough strange people touching them. They haven't learned that little kids are people too. They just haven't gotten out and experienced enough stuff.
Yeah, we definitely in veterinary medicine, particularly since the onset of the COVID pandemic, seen a lot more animals, particularly dogs, come in who have not been socialized.
Yeah, that's right, and then that's really bad. It's really bad, and they're willing to socialize the people in the house, and they're afraid of new places. They haven't gone out and gone to enough new places. Because one thing you do with the service dog puppies is you're taking them everywhere so that nothing's scary.
AHACon 2025 is more than just continuing education. It's your chance to take your career to the next level. Earn race approved CE credits, engage with industry leading experts, and gain fresh perspectives to bring back to your practice. Hear from powerhouse speakers, plus enjoy unique experiences like live pet portraits, charm bracelets, professional headshots, resume reviews, and much more. September 11th through 13th in downtown Chicago on the Magnificent Mile. Don't miss this transformative event. Learn more at c.aha.org. That's the letter c.aha.org.
I wanted to talk about one of your books. I've been reading your book, Animals Make Us Human. And one of the things that you write about is that animals' emotions and how their emotions are more important than their behavior in many instances.
I have emotions on my book. Talk about the Jack Penskep emotional systems. All mammals have them. You have fear, and you have anger, then you have separation distress. And separation distress is a different emotion than fear. Okay, you take the calf away from the cow, and then you have seek or the urge to explore. Like some animals, they're gonna go out and graze a lot of pasture, explore everything. Another animal just lay around the water hole. Then of course you have the sex drive. Then you have mother young nurturing. There's cows that will attack you to defend the calf, but she doesn't bother to lick it. See, those are separate emotional systems.
Yes, very interesting how there can be such variation from one individual to another.
Oh,
Um,
it's a lot of variation, like, approach a novel object, and you probably saw the space capsule when it landed, all the dolphins circling around it. That's approaching a novel object. I'm sure that when it landed, they scattered, but then it was just sort of bobbing there and not doing anything aggressive, and when the boats came to pick it up, there was just dolphins all around it, and that was approaching a novel object.
well, what better way to come down from space than to be surrounded by curious dolphins?
Oh, yeah, it was totally curious dolphins. That's what it was. That was if you take an iPhone and you put it down the middle of the chicken house, they will peck it.
Yeah.
Totally go at it pecking. I've got a picture of chickens doing that.
Yes, I've seen some social media videos of a woman who has an emu, and she sets up her phone in the farm and starts talking about the animals. And every single video, the emu comes and gets in the phone camera and tries to kind of knock the phone over. It's quite humorous.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're attractive. No, see, novelty is attractive when they can voluntarily approach. It's scary if it suddenly appears, like when the capsule landed, I'm sure the dolphins scattered.
Hmm.
Then the parachutes went down into the water and they just started coming up to them. There's all kinds of pictures. You can look at it online.
Hmm.
Dolphins swimming around, and the boats are coming up there to pick it up. Well, they've seen boats. That's no big deal. That's what it was. That's the seek trait, the exploration trait, and then your animals that are lower fear, uh, they'll come up to the space capsule first. Or if you put a beach chair out in the middle of the pasture, they'll come up to that first. And there'll be other animals that will hang to the back.
One of the other examples that you gave in the book about emotions versus behavior was the idea that if you put a gerbil in a cage, that it will spend a good amount of its time trying to dig a hole. But if you in studies, they compared putting a gerbil in a cage sort of with sand in the bottom versus putting a gerbil in a cage that already had kind of a burrow made for it. And they showed that when the burrow was already there, they stopped digging. So the need wasn't necessarily to dig, it was just to have the burrow, to have the
They
place to
want to
hide.
hide. They want to hide because that's an animal that a hawk will just swoop down and get it, and so they have a strong instinct to hide. So let's say you just put half an inch of sand in the bottom of the cage in the kid's bedroom, the gerbil's just gonna keep digging and digging and digging, but it's futile. There's no way he can get under anything. If you give them something they can get under, but they have an instinct to hide, because living out in the desert, if they go out in the open, the hawk's gonna get them.
So what's more important, it wasn't necessarily that the gerbil needed to be active so much of the time digging. It was more important that it alleviate its fear by being able to
It has
hide.
an instinctual behavior to dig. Even though there are no aerial predators in the kid's bedroom, it still has instinctual instinct to dig and try to hide.
And are there examples like that that would apply to perhaps dogs and cats that are going into the veterinary hospital of instances where we need to consider their emotion more than anything else in terms of maintaining their
Well,
welfare?
of course, if you're making it all treats and petting, then they're going to like to go to the vet hospital because a little tiny pinprick they get from a vaccine doesn't, you don't even hardly feel that. I think it's very important to put a mat on the table so that animal, whatever it is, cat or dog, has a non-slip floor. All animals panic when they start slipping. That's important for cattle too.
That is one of the next things I wanted to talk about. So you talk about sort of freedoms that all animals need to have. Two of them being freedom from pain, injury, and disease, but then also freedom from fear and distress. And so, as veterinary professionals, we want to try to alleviate any pain, injury, or disease. But sometimes the fact that our patients are so fearful or stressed when they come to see us makes it hard for us to accomplish that.
Well, one of
Um,
the reasons if some of these dogs are stressed is they just haven't been handled by enough strange people. And so they're freaking out because the vet is a strange person. You see, where dogs that get handled all the time by all kinds of different kinds of people aren't going to get freaked out by just a new person. But if these COVID puppies only just see their family, then you bring them in a strange person's put in a strange place, touching them. They've never been in a strange place before and had different people touching them. And I think it's important to train dogs. It's okay to have different people touch you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that a lot of us spend a lot of time talking to pet owners about is socialization and how important it is to do during that critical window when cats and dogs are really young,
Yep.
so that they're not fearful. I think part of the issue ends up being a lot of times we don't see them until after that socialization window has closed, um, and that hasn't happened. Um, I do feel like, as you already mentioned, and I wanted to bring up, the fear-free movement has been very instrumental in improving the ways that we interact with animals, and I'm really glad that it's becoming more mainstream.
No, and
Um,
that's really a good thing.
yeah. Can you talk about your work with fear-free?
Well, one of the things that I've really pushed was the non-slip flooring. Putting on, if the vet doesn't want to bother, cleaning the mats, well, you can have the owner buy a mat from Walmart. They bring it in, their mat, they take it home and clean it. Or the lobby, I went to a vet clinic with Marty Becker. Lobby had a skating rink for floor. Well, you could put some of those runners down that hotels put down that have a ribbed surface. I'd let the big dogs walk on that. There's a lot of very simple things that you can do. Make sure the table doesn't wobble because animals don't like unsteady footing. It's very important that the first visit to a new place is good. The first visit to a new place is bad. They don't forget. Then the issue comes up, should the white coat be worn? All depends upon how the dog perceives the white coat. If the first time it saw somebody wear the white coat, they got a bunch of treats and petting, then it's going to be a good thing. But if the first time they saw a white coat was be forcibly held down on a table by 3 veterinary techs, then maybe you want to get rid of the white coat because animals tend to make fear memories when bad stuff happens. It's on real obvious visual features on people, like a white coat or maybe a black cowboy hat. And then those become the fear memory objects. Sometimes it's changing the venue. We'll give the dog the vaccine out on the front porch. Then that's fine. It's a different venue. Doesn't trigger the fear memory. But we need to be working on preventing these fear memories from forming. We need to teach puppies that you can hold the paws kind of hard and they'll get a treat for that. So nail trims are not going to be a gigantic fight. See, when I was a kid in the 50s, all the dogs in the neighborhood ran loose. We didn't have the behavior problems we've got now because they were socialized. Socialized to other dogs, socialized to people. Now, the downside of that was the amount of car accidents. Lots of dogs got hit by cars and died, but their quality of life probably was better.
Do you feel like, based on your interactions in veterinary practices and working with veterinary teams, do you feel like there are elements of dog and cat behavior and their emotions that we still don't have a good understanding of?
Well, I think the emotional, I had the opportunity, I was at the University of Illinois to dissect the human brain, right down the middle, like that. And then over at the Animal Science Building, I'm dissecting a pig's brain, at the same time. And you look at where the emotional systems are located in the brain, they're the same. The main difference is the giant computer that's sitting up top here. We have a huge computer sitting up there that the dog doesn't have. But the emotion parts of the brain are pretty much the same. Now, the thing is, in a person, you're filtering that emotion. Okay, they're grieving, because the spouse died. They might write a poem or something about it. A dog's not going to do that. It's going to mope around in the corner. But I think those emotional systems, they're pretty much the same. When you look at the brain anatomy, we just have a huge computer up top. Just raw computing power that they don't have. But the emotion centers in the brain, they look very much the same.
That's such an
Down at the
interesting way to
bottom
think
of the
about it.
brain. Yeah, but that's kind of how I look at it. I'll never forget that human brain anatomy class. And we cut the brain right down like that. And then I went over the other building and cut the pig's brain, right? Half the same way. Right down the middle.
So, very similar emotions, perhaps sensory input quite different because of their expanded
Well,
range.
there's an interesting book called The Immense World. It's not my book, but it's about animal senses. And the octopus lives in a total touch-centric world. The dog is going to be very smell-centric. I see people jerking the dogs away from the trees that they want to smell. Well, you're not letting the dog get the gossip at the coffee shop. Who's been to that tree, and are they a friend? Are they bad or whatever? That's the gossip tree. I see people just yank them away from that. And they don't let them smell things. Yep, you see, but the smell is very central in the dog's social life. Then you take an animal like cattle or sheep, they're a prey species animal. So they notice all these little distractions because something moving in the bushes, maybe it was a wolf or a lion or something like that, something that might eat them. So they're very sensitive to any little motion that we would tend to not notice. Then the grazing animal has a visual streak instead of a fovea, so that when they're grazing, they can scan the horizon for danger. So different sensory systems. The octopus would live in this very vivid touch. Well, then the bat doing echolocation. That's a very different sensory. So you're hooking the brain up to all these different types of sensory systems, which is going to make experience different.
Different sensory systems and then different amounts or forms of processing in terms of, like you said, the big
Yeah.
neural computer that they
Well,
have or
there's a
or
huge
have to a
amount
lesser
of the
degree.
brain in humans is devoted to vision. Huge amount of the brain. Oh, back third of it. And then the whole frontal cortex. There's no memories are stored in the frontal cortex. It's all association areas. So you're associating memories with input and output in really complicated ways.
One of the things that I read briefly in your book was under the section on inappropriate elimination in cats. And you had a sentence in there that you wondered if perhaps there was an obsessive compulsive component
Well,
in
you can
some
get
cats.
certainly in some animals you can get obsessive compulsive behavior, And if you have more than one cat, you might want to have a couple of litter boxes, different parts of the house. That can help. You also need to keep them clean.
Yeah, definitely things we spend a lot of time talking about with cat owners, making sure they have at least a litter box for every cat, maybe one more, keeping them clean, finding out what the cat's preferences are in
Mhm.
terms
Cat-
of.
There's some cats don't like stuff that sticks to their paws. Another cat doesn't mind that.
I thought it was interesting though where you talked about, after a cat, because sometimes we talk about all these things, we try to fix all of those things, we put them all on the pet owner's radar, but you were talking about how sometimes once a cat starts eliminating outside of the litter box, they find it hard to stop.
Well, and their smell gets there. And then the other problem is, I remember we had a Siamese cat, and when we moved to a new house, all the framed pictures were leaning against the wall in the hall, and they had glass on them. Well, he saw his reflection in the glass and turned around and sprayed it, every single one of them. I didn't exactly improve the pictures.
But then there was also an element that you wrote about in terms of the cat wanting to perhaps leave their smell out of a sense of fear to try to sort of ward off any potential intruders or
Yeah,
predators or.
marking your territory. Yeah, that's things that they do, mark the territory. The other thing that we're finding, there was a vet student in the UK that did an interesting study on which cats were most likely to bite or scratch a veterinarian, and it was the indoor cats. They were more likely to bite or scratch than the outdoor cats, and I think that's just, the vet clinic office is just more novel, more scary. Indoor cat is not exposed to as many things.
That makes sense.
And unfortunately, the student never published a paper. They just went through the records in a cat clinic, and I looked for notes about cat bites, but that was the finding, and I would expect that because the indoor cat is exposed to less new things. And so it goes to a vet clinic. The vet clinic's gonna be more novel than a cat that's been outside, and lots of people have been touching it.
Yeah, definitely. So it could be so challenging kind of decide how to counsel cat owners because of course it's so much safer for cats to be indoor only in terms of their risk of physical injury, attack, exposure to infectious disease, parasites,
Well, especially
hunting of wildlife, all of those things.
influenza. Yeah. The other thing is, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, somebody put a camera on a cat and looked at how many birds she was killing,
Hmm.
and it was kind of shocking. And that time,
Well, there was a lot.
there was a lot of birds that the kitty cam showed, a lot of birds being killed. People didn't like that. So that's another reason for keeping them in is because they kill a lot of birds and do stuff with them to give them things to do. One of the things they do at our equine center in Denver, it's all indoors. You can't let horses exercise in the streets in downtown Denver. You can't do that. What's interesting is you turn a pair of horses loose in a big arena, and they've learned to bat this ball around. They will do behaviors they would never do with a rider, bucking and jumping and rearing and kicking, behaviors they'd never do with a rider. They just know they can cut loose then. And the arena's big enough that they can run full speed in there. Yeah, but you gotta get them out of the stalls and give them some chance to do that. Now, if you got pasture, put them on pasture, then the other thing to do is they rotate the horses out of there. Every few months, they get different ones and take the ones that are put them out on pasture. But that's basically an indoor animal. But that's one of the things they do for it, and they put 2 horses that are buddies together, and, man, they just run around there. They'll bat the ball around, the ball has to be introduced really carefully so they're not afraid of it. They bat that thing all around, rear and jump, and have a good time. So you keep an animal indoors, you're gonna have to do some things to enrich its life. See, that's one of the things that's being done for the horses that have to live in downtown Denver. They're not kept in stalls all the time.
Very important. And yeah, and we talk a lot about that, I think with cat owners because we do see probably the biggest thing that cat owners come in and complain about is, peeing and pooping outside of the litter box.
Yeah.
But I think stress in indoor cats is probably very under-recognized, particularly among cat owners. Um, and I found your chapter in your book on cats really interesting. Um, there was, an area where you were talking about, ways to help train cats and improve cat behavior, and certainly training cats is not something we think about as being very easily done, but you wrote that, cats can be very amenable to clicker training, um, even most more so than dogs.
Yeah, because you're using food motivation. Yeah, you can train a cat to do a dog agility course, clicker training. We've seen it.
And do you find that that generally works best when you're talking about kittens or not necessarily?
Well, animals need stuff to do. I mean, there's little feather toys so you can go like this, and also they'll really chase a laser pointer all around. In fact, you've got to be careful not to hurt a cat doing that because they'll, like, if you run it up the bookcase or something, it'll try to jump up the bookcase, and that might not be safe. You have to be careful with that because the cat gets so obsessed with chasing that it could do something to hurt itself if you put the laser little red light someplace that it might fall off of.
Yeah.
You gotta be careful with that.
And then, beyond the clicker training, we've talked on this already, but the idea of, socialization and handling kittens when they're very young
Oh,
so that
absolutely.
they
Yeah, you've gotta handle the kittens when they're really young until they get socialized to people. That's really important.
Can you talk about cats and their social behavior? Because I think a lot of time we think about cats as being very solitary.
Well, they're not as solitary as you think. There's been some fairies in cat colony, moms and daughters, staying together, and, they're not totally they're not as social as dogs, but the cat colonies will, form, friends and well, cattle do the same thing, like moms and daughters will graze together. And then when sequential ear tags came out, I think about 20 years ago, where you could buy ear tags with a numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4 sequentially numbered ear tags. And ranchers put those in their cattle. And of course, they put them in the no, 1, 2, 3. And what surprised them the next year is the cattle came back through the chute the next year almost in the same order.
In the same order? Wow.
Almost in the same order, and I probably had 4 or 5 ranchers, tell me about that right after those tags came out and became readily available. They were kinda shocked at that, and then they started noticing who was grazing together because now they had numbered tags, where before they hadn't, and moms and daughters grazing together, that's real common.
And so with cats, I mean, do you feel like when they sort of exist in nature that they do something similar?
Well, of course, when it's time to mate, yeah, that's, when they'll go find a mate, but people study these cat colonies, and they they have buddies. The other thing is, let's say you have an indoor cat, you need to spend some time playing with it and doing things to give it a good time. Okay, we have horses that, well, they have to live in stalls, but they're allowed to every day, 20 minutes, charge around the arena at full speed and do behaviors you don't do when you're riding. Rearing and bucking are not behaviors we do during riding. They know the difference. But it's good that
Certainly
they
hope that they don't do much of that during riding. It's not really
well, they're not
conducive to a good ride.
during riding. Animals make categories. When all the tack is off and I'm just out here in the arena with my buddy, we can run and rear and do all these behaviors, go full speed, and bat the ball around, and
Yes, very fun to see. I have seen some videos of that kind of thing.
but I think it's important that you do that when especially if you got the animals in a city situation, because I remember one time going to Vegas, and they had these horses they used for, medieval night, um, in Vegas, and they I don't think they had a chance to run around in the arena because they were cribbing and rocking and doing stereotypic behavior in their stalls. I was not pleased with what I saw.
So would you say even, between large animals and, small animals, companion animals and pets that really, their needs for socialization, their needs for exercise, their needs for interaction, they're really more similar than they are different. Of course, there are species differences, but I'm hearing so many similarities.
Well, yeah, and the other problem we got now with some of these rescue dogs, you don't know what kind of bad stuff was done to them. They may have just been alone somewhere, starved, uh, you know, tied up the chain behind the house, and then you have to really work with them to get them, try to get them more socialized. And some of those dogs, unfortunately, are really messed up. When you get puppies, you want to just you get them socialized to different people. They need to learn that toddlers are people too. And you want to make sure that when they interact with the toddler doesn't maul them. You need to make sure that this is a positive experience for the puppy. Now, the toddler pets it really gently and doesn't try to pick it up.
Yes, I can definitely relate to that, having recently had a couple of toddlers myself. It's very, very important. Requires constant supervision.
Small hummingbird can be pretty intimidating to a small puppy, but they got to learn that little people are people too. They've got to learn that. 'Cause I get worried. You have a dog that never was exposed to babies and toddlers, getting into some prey drive stuff that could get dangerous. Yeah, so they need to be introduced to them when they're really young in a really positive way.
Very good point. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. I thank you so much for spending your time with me and for sharing all of the insight that you've come by all these years through all the amazing work that you've done. Really appreciative of your time and
Well, to just kinda summarize up, an animal lives in a sensory-based world, and a dog is very much in a the smell is very important. The octopus is all about touch. With the prey species animals, vision is very important. A bat, lives from the sound world. You know, to understand an animal, you wanna get away from language. We also need to make sure that, an animal's first experience with something new, whether it's a horse trailer or a vet clinic, is a good first experience. Because if its first experience with something new is really terrible, you can get a fear memory. And those can be hard to get rid of. It's almost like a soldier getting PTSD, and then certain things will set it off. Like, I had a friend who had a dog that was terrified of baseball hats. Uh, because a man with a baseball hat had abused it. And you get rid of the baseball hat, then it was fine. Sometimes you can figure out what the thing is that's triggering that off and get rid of it. What you don't know. Yes. See, in my book, Animals in Translation, I talked about the black hat horse. And that was a horse that we knew exactly what happened to it. This idiot threw alcohol in its face, and he was wearing a black cowboy hat. So this horse was terrified of black cowboy hats. We also did a very interesting experiment with horses with a rotated play set. I have a paper that's did with Sarah Matlock and Megan Corrigan titled Reaction to a Complex Rotated Object in the American Quarter Horse. And took one of these little children's play sets, has a slide and a swing. Now think about it. The slide looks totally different this way than this way. And so they walked fillies and colts by this until they no longer reacted. And then when it was rotated 90 degrees, it became a new object. It's very important to get animals used to all sides of an object. I was just down at the rodeo on Sunday, and if you take a saddle and you put it on a fence, it looks like a saddle. But you take a saddle and you put it up on the horn, and you look at the fleece on the back of it, that doesn't look like a saddle. You might wanna get the horse used to that position of the saddle. Also, I heard about a dairy where, there was a dairy person, he had a wheelchair, and his cows were fine with the wheelchair. He went and visited his friend's dairy and about freaked out the cows. And he rolled into the parlor, and that was something totally novel. And it's something where you'd wanna gradually just introduce that, and he was kinda shocked at how scared 600 cows, like, about ran out of the parlor because all of a sudden this novel object rolled in there. And then I also repeated the playset experiment with a big, huge green chair with Western riders, and I just had them walk by this big, huge green chair until they no longer stopped. Rotated that chair 90 degrees, half the horse's hard stop. We did it at a walk. If that had been a gallop, half the riders would have been dumped off. And I did it at a walk just to prove that it became a new object. So you see that that's a different picture, the rotated chair or the rotated playset. So if I was going to introduce the horse to the wheelchair or the rotated or the playset, I want to walk him all around it so he sees all sides of it. It's a sensory-based world. I really like that paper because it now showed with a scientific study, something I'd been talking about for years.
Very true. You have so many amazing resources that you've created over the years. I was blown away when I went to look the other day at how many books you've written and how many papers you've written.
Well, my website, Grandin.com is my last name, my last name is my livestock website. This is a new book, my very best livestock papers, all in one book. Then on the Grandin.com, there's a whole book section. There's also a section with a research section that's got links to my scientific papers, and you can find that playset article in that under the horses section. I like to take a real practical approach to things. What are practical things that people could do? Like something like letting the horses out in the arena. Well, a lot of stables could do that. When you take two horses that are best buds and you let them out in the arena. Now, somebody has to spend the time to do that. And then, because we got to prevent some of these behaviors like cribbing and, stall kicking, all this kind of stuff like that. You got to work on preventing those kind of behaviors because that just starts out of boredom and then they kind of get addicted to it. Well, some, like a horse that just likes to be able to move its body really fast and do what a horse can do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and insight with us. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed getting to meet you and to speak with you. And we'll share a lot of these resources with our audience. And really appreciate your time.
Well, it's really great to be here, and thank you so much for having me.